People always think we're attacking NASA, and we're actually NASA enthusiasts when it comes right down to it, right? We're space enthusiasts. We want accountability. We want disclosure. We want to see what's actually there, and we will accept the limitations. We'll support the limitations on what's capable of doing. We don't need to keep researching in and find out, oh, all we're looking at is CGI. If you can't do it, say so. Both are so-called experts on the subject and claim that they have thoroughly debunked every claim made.
Of course they have.
And of course, that would mean that they would have to have read every book, not just read it, but researched every book from Bill Casing, Renee, James Collier, David Percy, Trevor Weaver, Jarrett White, and that means that they have watched and researched every one of the 500 videos we have up. And not only that, they would have to have read and researched every article on the OLIS site. That would take a team of people at least 10 years there alone. They come up, and that statement that is made there, every single argument claimed that NASA faked the moon landings has been discredited. That just shows that they're a bunch of idiots. They take their little PhDs out and claim that they know better.
Well, of course they're going to say that because they can't possibly come around and say that the moon landing has question marks over it. Robert was talking about the Institute of Physics, the IOP. How do we know that we went to the moon?
Yeah, that's the one that has that statement on it right there. Institute of Physics.
That is mentioned in Trevor Weaver's book. And he wrote to the Institute of Physics saying, please show your workings. Please explain how you reached that conclusion. Because the Institute of Physics are quite an esteemed academic group. That was about 2 years ago. We're still waiting for the reply.
So they don't have a reply because they haven't done the research. That article was put up 4 days ago.
How do we know we went to the moon? You see, there's no author on it, is there? There's nobody credited with writing it, so it's very hard to know what they're talking about.
They're just doing that as a generalization, and they give 5 reasons, which are the basic things that NASA puts out. No stars, they went around the radiation belts, that they, 5 normal bloody things that they do, and that just makes them parrots, which means they really haven't done any research.
No, they haven't done any research at all, because they wouldn't be writing about these ridiculous things. They talk here about radiation, fried by radiation, they say. The most convincing argument that the moon landings are faked has to do with something called the Van Allen belts. Well, what a stupid remark. Why not explain why they're called the Van Allen belts? We always do. Named after Professor James Van Allen of Iowa University. They're made of highly energetic charged particles. Well, charged with what? Are they electrons or protons? Tell us what they are. Institute of Physics, you're supposed to know what you're talking about. Some people believe humans couldn't have passed through these belts without being exposed to lethal doses of radiation. Yes, quite a lot of people do. And what happens when you get beyond them? Is the radiation level beyond the Van Allen belts as harsh and as dangerous to humans as passing through the belts? You don't explain that. This is the Institute of Physics we're talking about. Come on, guys, get real.
Readings from the 9 Apollo missions that reached the moon showed the astronauts' average radiation exposure was 0.46 radiation-absorbed dose, RADS. This proved that NASA was right to shield the astronauts from radiation, though it's less than experienced by some nuclear energy workers. 0.46 rad is around 10 times more than the radiation exposure of medical professionals who routinely work with X-rays and radiotherapy machines.
Yeah, well, that's what they claim the absorption rate into the human body is.
Yeah, right, but if this is the case, then why does the Earth have Van Allen belts? Why does the Earth have belts, then? I mean, this cosmic radiation, look what happens when you get CMEs. Look at what it does to satellites, shorts them out. It ruins them. They're finished. Elon Musk lost 30-some-odd satellites due to the last CME. They just quit working. Now you're telling us that this dosage that these astronauts received is 46 rads, 10 times more radiation than exposed to medical professionals who routinely work with X-ray and radiotherapy machines. Sorry, I don't believe that. I don't buy that. Because when you see the ISS traveling through that anomaly, look at all those particles. They're all green and it's flying through there and they have to turn off their equipment. Well, that has to be more than 0.46 rads.
They're just quoting the table that NASA produced to show how little radiation there was that the astronauts had received. Well, of course they would. It's about the same level as you receive in the ISS, because the astronauts didn't go any higher than low Earth orbit. But nobody knows that until you look at the details and you examine the science. It's unbelievable that they can make these statements without backing them up. They're supposed to be able to reference scientific papers. Where are they? They're not referencing anything. All they're doing is just re-quoting what NASA want them to say, because they've never examined it.
The last statement that they make is probably the wildest on the reflectors on the moon, because they're claiming that they're doing tests on that continuously all the time to measure the distance the moon is from the Earth. And of course, it's in direct conflict with a whole lot of other articles written on the photoelectric charge that levitates the dust on the moon. Millions of tons of dust going up several kilometers and staying up there until the sunlight comes off and then it comes back down. Of course, that would erase all of the footprints. It would cover every rock. So any photograph you see, you should see them covered in dust. Be like a fresh snowfall, a few inches of snowfall on it. And of course, it's going to cover the laser reflector. And that happens every month for the last 50 years, and they claim this thing is still there functioning. Absolutely ridiculous, and it's in direct conflict, their statement, to their own documents.
But notice that they never say who it is who's supposed to be doing these measurements. Which institute is firing this laser at the moon? And how do they know they're not getting anything back?
They've been firing it before the reflectors were there, so...
Yeah, Massachusetts Institute of Technology were doing it before any mirrors were on the moon, and getting a signal back.
So when we look at another part of this article, it says, proof we walked on the moon. Of course, until we return to the moon, there will always be anomalies and oddities in the record that can spark new claims that the moon landings were faked. But it is the sheer size and variety of this record that proves everyone that these claims to be false. Well, we've seen what has come back from the moon. Artemis 1. Where are all of the pictures? Where's the video? Where are the photos and videos from those 24 cameras that they had on board of that thing?
It's all CGI.
Yeah, every time it's CGI, and they have the wrong side of the moon showing.
Yep, they do.
And here's the other thing about that. They happen to fly over the Apollo landing sites. But guess what happened? They did it in darkness. So what was the point of it?
Just so they could say that they flew over it.
How convenient that they fly over it during the nighttime so you cannot see anything. It's always the same with these guys. They can't show any evidence of anything.
It took off at nighttime as well. You take off at nighttime, you fly over the Apollo 11 landing site at nighttime, and we're expected to believe that because they say they flew over it, it was there. No, it wasn't. There's no evidence whatsoever that the Apollo 11 landing site even exists. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter took pictures, allegedly. Were they photoshopped? Quite possibly, because you can't prove they weren't. And just because they say that they took these photographs, just because they say they flew over the site with Artemis, doesn't mean to say they did. It's just that's what they want you to believe they did. It's sad.
I don't think they got anywhere near the moon then and now. I do not believe for 1 minute, because if they could do it, they would show us. They're claiming they've got all this compiled data, and that discredits everything just because they've got so much data. will read the data. Here's all their test results, all their materials that they've developed. All of them failed. So what do? They take them down. All their vacuum testing stuff, it's all gone. All their other data on their materials that they've been testing, all gone. It's no longer available. That's how good their data is, because the test results on the report server never showed positive results.
And it could that be because NASA or certain people are listening to what we're saying? I mean, on Shill Stompers, they're on there all the time. They're probably paid by 1,000 words. You know, the more things they can post up on there, the more they get paid, because they're trying to destroy the channel. It's not going to work, because Robert's done a very, very good security operation on it to make sure it stays there.
And why would they want to?
And now you have this other article with History Extra. And what they're claiming is that all the claims made from the footage can be readily explained or debunked. The lack of stars, for example, is simply as a result of the highly lit foreground washing out the detail of the background. But just hold on a second, but this is really what gets me. What they were saying, when you go down a little further, the reasons why the theory took hold and endures. Because, after all, NASA suddenly stopped going to the moon in 1979, and the debunkers, or the conspiracy theorists, claim that they didn't go back because they couldn't do anything. Like, they didn't go there in the first place. They're claiming that because hundreds of thousands of people worked in the Apollo program, and yet after half a century there has been no credible evidence from the former NASA employees of anything being faked. Well, I call baloney on that, because we've heard whistleblowers that have come out and say that they personally doctored some of those photos that were taken from around the moon because there were, quote, anomalies on them that they had to airbrush out. These articles are making it sound like there were 400,000 employees all lumped together in one trailer, and every one of them had access to this technology. Well, they didn't. There were hundreds of contractors working on all this stuff, and they were spread all the way through the country. So this baloney about 400,000 workers all being cram-packed together on the base is baloney.
Of course it is.
It doesn't stop. So why don't these guys go and read the Owlus site or have a look at 500 of our videos that we're showing them? Bill Demos came on here and showed us why vacuum destroys man-made objects when put in it, especially when you take it down to a level of Tor 10 to the minus 6. That's when the magic starts happening. So these guys are going to take the Gateway project, and they're going to build these thin-walled cylinders, and they're going to build a space station in an environment that's Tor 10 to the minus 11 with no structure? No. Are you kidding me?
Let's check out the author of this article, who's obviously an expert in the subject of moon landings. That's his name, Francis French, and also the person credited at the beginning, Jenny Wilkes.
Francis French is the co-author of a book, Apollo 15. You'll find that he's a co-author of that, but he considers himself a specialist in spaceflight.
Okay, well, perhaps he can explain why he doesn't talk about vacuum levels in space.
Well, I think he would be more than welcome to come on and discuss his factual statements with us.
That would be a very interesting discussion. Come on, Francis, come and have a chat with us. Tell us all about how we're wrong and how we don't know what we're talking about. I'll ask a few questions and maybe we'll get some answers. So come on, Francis, if you're so interested in space and the Apollo program, which we know about, we've spent a long time looking at it, so we probably know as much as you do about it. So come on discuss it with us, if you're up to it. If you think you can answer the questions that we'll ask, we'll be very polite. We won't call you rude names.
Well, when they claim that they have debunked everything, we'll just show him a few things that he can look at. We could start maybe with the wet flag and then Buzz Aldrin in the door frame. I'm going to pull up a couple of interesting photographs here. We'll just pull this image up here. This is the rover tire. This is what a rover tire track looks like. Then we come along and we're going to pull this one up.
It's not the same track.
There's two tread patterns here. One's a pure block pattern, and the other one is a diamond pattern. So I looked up some industrial tire tracks. There's very much the pattern that you're looking at there. That tire right there is going to produce that one there. It's more like that, a little closer together. That's what you're looking at. And this is Apollo 17.
Yeah, those are two distinct tire tracks.
Two completely distinct tire tracks, when the only thing that could be making the track is making a chevron pattern, and neither one of those is a chevron pattern, not even close.
No.
These are the actual photographs here, right there from Apollo 17, and that's what you see when you pull into it.
But they aren't chevron patterns. They aren't what's supposed to be on the moon. What's going on?
If you're on a set and you're moving equipment around and you've got like a front-end loader or whatever that has two different tire patterns on it running around, and you forget to regroom the set after you're done moving stuff around. Maybe the rover broke down and they came out and picked it up and took it away to repair it or replaced it with another one. Right? But that's exactly what you get, and there's absolutely no way that anything that they had, if you're on the lunar surface, you just don't have another machine available. You only have the one, and it's only going to make one kind of a tread pattern.
That block pattern looks very much like the old Willis Jeep. The US Army used Willis Jeeps.
I pulled this up as an example of different types of tread patterns that are used in commercial vehicles, right? Most of these are tractor tires and stuff like that, but you'll see these kind on front-end loaders or any off-road machine, right? There's three different designs right in there. This one's running about as close as what you can get to what you're seeing on that image. But it should be here. It should be the chevron pattern is what's being displayed.
Yeah, that all obviously before it broke down.
Then you suddenly realize that in actual fact, they were on a set doing it. They obviously had a problem. They had to bring an industrial piece of equipment in to adjust whatever went wrong on the set. Yeah. And then they forgot to regroom that. And that's exactly what you're seeing in the photograph. I mean, that is as blatant as image as a wet flag or a buzz having that there, because it just can't be there. It's right in front of your face. When you're looking at it, it's right in front of your face.
And because it's so blatantly obvious, people have overlooked it. They say, that couldn't be there. That couldn't be there, so they've ignored it, as the authors of these ridiculous articles are. I mean,
the only question is, in Apollo, did Cernan actually intentionally take that photograph as a whistleblower image?
It could well be, because the astronauts did take a lot of photographs which do show some very strange activity on the moon. It's almost like they were trying to show that they were not going to be part of this fabrication.
Yeah, well, like when they dig stuff up and take pictures of it intentionally, they grab it with the tongs and hold it up for you to see it in the tongs, in its piece of steel or whatever they've got with it, right? Even the camera on the DAC camera, when it zooms into something and spends an awful lot of time on it, they're trying to show you something. That looks quite intentional that somebody would take that photograph. It's not just a nice panoramic scene, it's in there. Those are the type of things that these people who just claim everything is debunked, that not only would they have to read all of the articles and all of the books that have been out there, right? But they'd also have to research it to debunk each statement that's being made. They'd have to take every photograph that I have presented and show that they had another machine out there that could make those tire tracks. I don't know how you do Buzz Aldrin in the doorway, because, I mean, he's up against the frame. They'd have to modify the LEM and say, oh, the console was removable. Just amazing. And, of course, they can't get by the wet flag. Doesn't matter how you do it. When you start looking at that and having these people come out, like the physics department, I mean, you got a whole whack of scientists there with degrees, and they're just putting this up, and that's just in the last few days that went up, to make that statement, oh, we've discredited everything. No, you haven't even looked.
No, you haven't discredited anything. I mean, you're making ridiculous statements which are completely fictional. You're not backing them up with any evidence whatsoever. It's just you saying it. Appeal to authority. Ridiculous. I mean, the final comment in this article, this History Extra article, which is from a BBC magazine, the sheer scope of the conspiracy to pull it off leaves an unshakable conclusion. It was easier to go to the moon than it would have been to fake going to the moon. What a ridiculous statement to make. You don't know what you're talking about. You haven't examined anything. BBC, Biased Broadcasting Corporation, they call it over here. The official website for the BBC History magazine and History Revealed. I think somebody's getting quite worried about the comments that are being made about the moon landings and the faking of them. Why are we suddenly seeing articles appearing now trying to discredit what we're saying? Unless NASA are getting really worried. They set up Artemis, which was a bit of a shit show, to be honest. It really didn't prove anything. It's very similar to the Apollo 8 launch, orbit the moon and come back. Though Apollo 8 allegedly had astronauts on board, which I doubt very much. Just went into low Earth orbit, and we're told it went to the moon. That's easier to fake.
I still don't believe that any human could survive just the sound volume of being put on top of a Saturn V rocket. You wouldn't be able to communicate with them because they wouldn't be able to yell loud enough, even if they were protected to the point where they would be survivable. When you get up to that number of decibels up there, when you are 7 and 8 times the volume that it would take to kill you, that you have to be 10 kilometers away for a viewing, and it's still 134 decibels. You couldn't even hardly yell at the person next to you. They wouldn't be able to hear you when you're 10 kilometers away from that thing. That exhaust is coming out at a supersonic level. There's actually no audio track of a Saturn V launch that can correctly adjust to the sound of it. It can't capture the sound, it just cuts out. The volume's too high to record, even at 10 kilometers.
And how come you got to be 10 kilometers away from the rocket launching, but the astronauts were only 100 meters away from the exhaust? They were sitting on top of the rocket. They would have heard it just the same as anybody else.
When you see the reflection off the ground on the night launch and the vibration of the sound is lighting up the sky.
It is.
That will liquefy your body. No question about it. 180 decibels will kill you. 190 decibels is twice as loud as 180 decibels, and they were at 205.
So you would have thought, wouldn't you, that if you were an astronaut on the top of that rocket, 360 foot high, you would possibly get affected by the level of sound coming from the ground. It doesn't deflect away just because you're on top of the rocket.
They were communicating in the sound level with 70 decibels inside wherever they were giving the audio. They were talking in normal volume of voice with no background sound audible.
Which is why they had that chute, so that all the astronauts could get into a secure bunker, a soundproof bunker underneath the rocket, several tens of meters underneath. Yes.
And they had many hours to get there and set up.
Here's something I would really like to show, because I brought this up a few times, but I would like to actually show it. This is an oxygen tank from a scuba diver. This is an oxygen tank in the PLSS. This little oxygen tank was supposed to keep the astronauts alive on Apollo 17 for 8 hours without recharging it. This scuba tank over here that scuba divers use will last only 25 minutes. This tank is half the size of this tank. So could anybody help us do the math on this? Because if this tank could keep somebody alive for 8 hours with oxygen supply, how on earth can this tank only keep them alive for 25 minutes when it is 2 times the size in volume?
Oh yeah, but NASA has that super modified oxygen that they use.
Yeah, but they say that this tank is compressed to 1,000 psi. This tank is compressed to 3,000 psi.
Yeah, but at 850 psi, it becomes a liquid, so you're not getting any more volume in it. The reason why they put it to 3,000 psi is because it keeps it more stable.
Yes, I understand that, but it's the volume. It's the volume of oxygen, air, whatever you want to call it, liquid oxygen. It doesn't matter. You cannot have a tank this size that's going to keep people alive for 8 hours. You either double it or quadruple it, and you're going to have a tank that only lasts 25 minutes. If that was the case, then this technology right here would have been implemented into the scuba industry 50 years ago. Again, it makes no sense. So if somebody could please do the math for us and tell us, especially the Bertie bunch, if they could tell us how that is possible. How is it possible, guys? Come on, we want to hear the answer.
That's a factor of 16 times.
The only thing I have seen or heard to try to explain the lack of oxygen in the PLSS, the Portable Life Support System, is that they were using a rebreather apparatus, i.e. the gas was being recirculated, the carbon dioxide was being removed from it.
And you got a CO2 scrubber.
And you have a CO2 scrubber, but the fact of the matter is that divers have been using a dragger, a rebreather system, what the Navy calls it, but that only is going to keep you an extra, 1.73 times plus what the oxygen has. So if you have 2 hours, you're only going to get, 3.47 hours.
If you breathe in the oxygen, you're using the oxygen in your body. It's not coming out again. Carbon dioxide is coming out, but not the oxygen. Right, CO2 has oxygen in it, but is that available for use for humans to breathe?
Fabric just contains the CO2, it doesn't separate it and give you back the oxygen again.
It doesn't. You get lumps of carbon there, wouldn't you?
So you're going to get a maximum of almost 4 hours out of that little bottle, if what NASA says is true. But I still don't understand, even with a rebreather, how you're going to get 4 hours out of that if you have a bottle that's that size. That's breaking the laws of thermodynamics.
The first documents for Apollo 11 claim that they had 4 hours of oxygen. And then they get to Apollo 17 or 15, 16, and 17, and they're going out on 8-hour EVAs, and the PLS is exactly the same. There's no modifications to it whatsoever.
And surely if you're going to have any form of oxygen tank like that, you're going to have a safety measure. You're going to have additional storage, because you're not going to go right to the limit of what your tank holds. You're going to have at least 10%, if not more, of extra supply in case you get trapped outside. You have to stay outside.
Well, now we get to the rover. What idiot in their right mind would not have extra equipment on board to keep them alive? They should have extra water. They should have extra battery power available for the PLSs. They should have an umbilical cord that they could hook onto in case of an emergency, with an extra oxygen tank on there for each of the astronauts.
Of course you would.
That should be mandatory on that rover. And all it had on there was a couple of tools so they can pick around on the ground with, and everything else was camera equipment. You start looking at the rover, it is nothing but a mobile movie production studio. There was a comment made under the last video, and the guy was asking how long it would take before you'd have to readjust the antenna. At 250,000 miles with a digital signal on it, 10 to 20 minutes at tops? Like at 250,000 miles pointing back at the Earth, you'd have to be so exact. Any little movement on there, any little movement on the rover, and of course they got that high gain antenna on the rover running around, it could take them a whole day to set up that thing to get a signal. And then you're going to lose it again very, very quickly.
Yeah, because you've only got 2 degrees of movement. On the high gain antenna, there's supposed to be a little sort of sighting device.
That's like 2 arc seconds of movement, which is a very, very fine tune to start with.
You're supposed to be able to line it up very accurately and then you drive around in your Rover and the thing bounces around, and you're supposed to say that that is still lined up. Makes no sense.
And the entire length of time, they never lost any communication.
No, they didn't. No, it was perfect communication the whole way through.
That's a complete simulation error for them to be talking on the rover while it's moving.
Well, assuming it was on the moon, if they were doing it here on Earth, it would be much easier to do it because you only have to transmit from the rover to the receiver, which is probably...
Well, that high-gain antenna wouldn't even function on a set on the Earth.
Yeah.
They'd have nothing more than walkie-talkie signals, right, that are picking up their little Snoopy helmets. Of course, you can see that none of it was there because everything that we have looked at shows that it wasn't taken on the moon.